So today I'm pleased to introduce Alan Joyce, Director of Wolfram Alpha Socioeconomic Content Development, who will introduce us to some of the things you can do using the plugin and how back and forth conversations between human and AI can be useful and reliable. Alan, I'm going to pass things over to you.
Great. Thank you very much. So welcome everybody. Happy to have everybody here and to kick off this week of exploring a little bit of what's possible with the combination of ChatGPT and Wolfram. Now, what I've got up here and what we had mentioned at the top here, Stephen had posted a blog all the way back on January 9th, where we had been doing some exploration early on when ChatGPT first launched, and realizing there are things that ChatGPT and other LLMs are still not very good at, and these are sort of well-known shortcomings. They're not necessarily good at math. They're not good at things that are computational. They can hallucinate information, even simple facts, but present them in a very confident way. So these are things that, our background and just through Wolfram Alpha, through the Wolfram language, through various interactions with other intelligent assistants over the years, this is the kind of value that we've brought to lots of other projects. The computational aspects, the reliable curated data that you have access to through the Wolfram knowledge base. And so we did, if you read this blog, we were doing some very kind of hands-on experiments with correcting the content that came back from ChatGPT. Asking it a question, going manually over to Wolfram Alpha, kind of pasting data back in from our API or from the language, and then having it correct its answers. It worked pretty well. Obviously it was going to be a lot more useful if there was an automatic way to do that. And sometime shortly after this, we were contacted by OpenAI, and they invited us to be part of this initial group of people who were going to work on this plugin system and producing things that could be directly switched on in a ChatGPT session and allow the model to call out to various other services and bring in information or perform other actions with other services outside. So that was a very, very quick run there for us. So by the late March, the plugin system was released, and we spent a number of weeks in there experimenting with things, trying to figure out the best way for Wolfram Alpha and Wolfram Language to communicate with the ChatGPT model. And so, this has been very exciting for us. We were originally invited just to do a Wolfram Alpha plugin, and then we sort of realized very early on that, that would be really cool in being able to sort of let the LLM communicate with Wolfram Alpha the way it's designed to be communicated with, just natural language. It wouldn't have to construct any kind of elaborate API calls. It can just ask a question and we'll give it an answer. And so it's sort of the thing that Wolfram Alpha was really designed to do well in the first place. But then we realized, there was a lot more that we could do if we brought the Wolfram language into this. And so, for people who aren't familiar, hopefully most of you are, but Wolfram Alpha, the website, there's an API. We have lots of different kinds of integrations where you can just ask a natural language question and get an answer to that, along with lots of other contextual data. And this spans domains from, pure math through chemistry, science, movies, music, people, geography, all kinds of different things. But then we realized also with the Wolfram language, and certainly having the model be able to, we knew it could generate code in lots of different languages, including the Wolfram language. So giving it a way for ChatGPT to call out to the Wolfram cloud, write code, run computations, get visualizations, bring that stuff back into ChatGPT would be even more compelling. So we spent some time, working on this and sort of fine-tuning some of the things we already did with Wolfram Alpha and the Wolfram language. We had a number of different endpoints for Wolfram Alpha, a spoken results API, full results API. Ended up developing a new custom endpoint specifically for LLMs. And this is, I'll show some examples of what that looks like in a minute here, but sort of realizing that the best thing that we could pass back to a model like ChatGPT would be something like not just sort of written out sentences, because it does a very good job of synthesizing structured data just on its own, but giving it sort of a plain text representation of the full Wolfram Alpha output. So getting the result, getting other contextual data, getting unit conversions and comparisons, assumptions, all those kinds of things. And similarly with the Wolfram language, having an API that the model could call the cloud, it can execute Wolfram language code, but then realizing we could also send some suggestions back because it doesn't always do a good job of writing code in any language. Um, but so we have an API that we're really steadily building on with a lot of things, like if it messes up pattern matching, if or bracket matching, if it invents a new function that doesn't exist, giving it ways to check the documentation programmatically and get usage for things in the Wolfram language. So a lot of interesting things that we were able to you know, uh, do some very rapid prototyping in the cloud and with Wolfram Alpha and come up with new ways for those things to communicate with ChatGPT. So I'm just going to start here, and I for people who don't have access to the plugin, for right now, it is only available to a limited set of people who are ChatGPT Plus subscribers. We don't have any control over this. This is OpenAI's uh, trying to take a very careful, methodical approach to rolling this out, making sure that they're concerned about security and safety, and that the overall platform is going to be stable and doing what people expect it to do. There are plans to continue opening this up much more, but it's their timetable that we're on right now. When you do get access, what this is going to require is, you'll have a choice of models at the top of the screen. When you get access to plugins, the plugins model is really a distinct model from either the GPT 3.5 models or GPT-4. So you select the plugins model, and then that brings up another pull down, and you can go into their plugin store. And so there are lots of things here that are already pre-installed, well, that are available to install. And so you would just find the Wolfram one, pick a model, pick plugins, and then there's a plugin store here. And then you can go here and you click on Wolfram and install that plugin. There's also instructions here, and certainly OpenAI is encouraging people to start learning about developing their own plugins. And so there are lots of paths there. We've been experimenting with some things on our own, coming up with some other Wolfram Alpha, Wolfram language-based plugins that are really interesting, using that to kind of iterate on some of the functionality we have with our own plugin. Okay, so then once that's enabled, then you can see at the top of the screen, you're using that model. You've got the plugin that you want selected, and then you can just start with, you know, certainly basic things. So I'm today going to focus on relatively simple things. We have presenters the rest of the week who are going to dive a little deeper into some specific domains and some more complicated workflows. But I just want to give people a sense of how things are working behind the scenes here, some things to think about when you do get access to the plugins. So a simple call like this. Um, we're in our sort of core prompt for the plugin, we're encouraging it to favor Wolfram Alpha over Wolfram Language, at least for things that don't require sort of complex programming. So for something like this, it's making a call to Wolfram Alpha. And this is to give you a sense of what the LLM API returns. I mean, this is really sort of the plain text version of what you get from a full Wolfram Alpha result, all the different pods. In cases where there's an interesting image, we're including links to those so that the model can access those if it needs to, all the sort of supplemental stuff. Um, Sometimes the model will be wordier than others, and it'll grab, lots of things from the results and paste them in. But I wanted to kind of do these live so that people can see, why how there's some variation and see how the model is making some of its decisions. Um, you could do something like, plot sine of x. This might go to Wolfram Alpha. Nope, it's actually, for this case, it's going to write some Wolfram language code and it's going to evaluate that through the API. And so there's a couple of endpoints, and it knows for sort of plain natural language inputs, send those to Alpha. If it's got code to evaluate, then send that to the Wolfram Cloud plugin. And so what we send back there is an image of the result. And it gives you a little natural language summary of what's going on. It can give you that plot. Um, There's lots of other things. We certainly have access to most of the content, most of the things you can do through the Wolfram Alpha website are are accessible through this API. So anything from people, buildings, oceans, like I've said, math, science, movies, all the other kinds of computation, unit conversions, time zone conversions, all the sort of computational power of Wolfram Alpha is accessible through here. And so here again, that's a big result. A lot of stuff gets entrained for a person sometimes, even if it's just a straightforward query. Um, but this is calling Wolfram Alpha. We're getting a result. I've run this other times. Hold on, I can show some past cases. Well, it didn't do it that time. Sometimes it'll pull in some of that extra information, and you could prompt the model and say, I want you to use as much as possible from Wolfram Alpha results, and it'll give you the primary result and then write you a nice sort of short essay that incorporates all the other content from that. Um, Something else to be aware of when you get access to the plugin is you can leave it up to the model to decide who to call when, whether it goes to Wolfram Alpha or it goes to Wolfram Language. But you can also certainly steer it in one direction or another. Now, by default, this is, it's a straightforward basic question. It's calling Wolfram Alpha. If we do the computation there, it gives the data straight away. Um, you could tell it, you know, use Wolfram Language. It would help if I could spell, but it does a pretty good job of correcting itself when I don't. Um, Now it's going to try to make a call here. And I wanted to highlight this because one thing that's interesting and one reason that when you do get plugins, you definitely want to make sure you look at what's happening under the hood sometimes. Because the thing you tell it to do or the input you give may sometimes be rephrased, and sometimes you can kind of watch it learning from its mistakes as it goes a little bit. Like this is a case where pretty sure, yep, exactly what I thought. It's trying to call an entity in the Wolfram language, and it's assuming that there's a standard name that's just camel case Joe Biden. Um, but in fact, uh, Joe Biden has some of this additional stuff. Just a lot of our entity identifiers have some additional things, so we're sure that they're unique in our system. And so this is one of those cases where it tried some code. We sent a message back and said, that's not the right entity, but you can use interpreter to find the right entity. It constructed a call, got the right entity, made another call, and now it's probably doing slightly dumb things with code that I'm going to just stop it from doing for a minute here because this is another case where you want to look and see what it's doing and know if it's kind of making good choices. Another example I had before, um, it went through this, it got the right thing for Joe Biden. It tried doing something weird with date difference and date string, and then finally it wrote some useful code and did date difference of that entity and got a result out. This is one of the reasons why we tend to steer it towards Wolfram Alpha for things that are really basic, because Wolfram Alpha is just kind of doing all that sort of thing um, sensibly on its own the first time. Certainly there's other kinds of basic data you can get access to. What's the population of France? Sorry, they're pretty boring questions, but I'm really trying to highlight some workflows here. So this is another one. It's going to call out. It also does a very good job of restating questions in kind of a simplified way when it knows it's calling Wolfram Alpha. So it's going to go to pare things down to just sort of the most essential information instead of sending some very wordy input. And here's one of those cases where it automatically, answered the question, but it's also dipping into some of the other entrained data from Wolfram Alpha and writing that up here. Now you can do other things here that are really interesting when you're thinking about workflows with Wolfram Alpha and Wolfram Language together that aren't possible right now with just the Wolfram Alpha site. Like continuing a conversation. So I could say something like, is that bigger than Spain? And the model is, sort of keeping track of everything that's come before within whatever context window it has available. It knows we're talking about population, so it makes a call for Spain's population, writes up a result, knows that we're looking for a comparison, says, yep, France has a larger population than Spain. But then you can do something else like, what is the percent? I am not typing well today. I could blame my keyboard though. What is the percent difference? Well, not spelled right, but it knows what I mean. Um, and so I'm guessing, yeah, keeping up these chains, and this is sort of going multi-step, and I'll show an example of where it does things kind of all in one go. But this is a case where it's got data that has come back in previous responses, and now it's actually writing some code that it's sending to the Wolfram language to solve this question. It's assigning some variables to the population France, population Spain, and then giving a result here. So kind of interesting to be able to do that. Um, there are other cases where, given a particular input, um, and this is just kind of an oddball case someone had come up with at some point here. Solve the equation y equals x times z, where x is the elevation of Mesa, Arizona, and z is Kareem Abdul-Jabbar. Um, and now probably because I haven't given it any other kind of prompting about how to handle a question like this, my guess is, yep, and you can sit here and watch it write code. It's going to try writing code to solve this all in one go here. Um, I think it tried to do some of that math itself. Um, but you could also do something like this, where this is one of the things that's really useful to keep in mind when you're dealing with the Wolfram plugin. Um, there are some built-in prompts that we've come up with and we're continuing to improve that we're trying to get the model to do certain things. We want it to handle math a certain way. We want it to prioritize one endpoint over the other. But that doesn't stop you from adding some other things. Like if you know you're going to be doing some complex calculations, we can do something like this. Like if I ask you a question that requires multiple calculations, explain the problem, send each calculation separately, and sort of build the results as you go. And sometimes with very long kind of involved workflows, this can be really good because it helps the model even to do things step by step instead of trying to just write a bunch of code up front and then have to debug it later. So this is a case where, here's how we're going to solve it. Making a call to get the elevation of Mesa, Arizona. Let's make a call to get the height of Kareem Abdul-Jabbar. And then again, it's going back and it's just writing some very simple code that it sends to the cloud to get a result. Um, there's other things you can certainly do here going back and forth. One thing that's been particularly interesting because we have localized versions of Wolfram Alpha in a number of languages, but not everything. But you can, sorry, let me try to paste this. Um, One of the things that's in our prompt is trying to encourage the model, if an input has come in a non-English language, um, translate that to English, send the question to Wolfram Alpha or do the computation in Wolfram Cloud, and then return the answer to the user, though, in the language that they originally asked the question in, which is kind of cool to be able to have that cycle set up here. And now, again, this is one of these things where you can um, you could switch back and forth between languages, which is what I'll do right now. And here it's actually pulling a lot of additional contextual information from the alpha result. Um, Sometimes it just goes on longer than you want it to. I'm going to tell it to take a break. Um, and then probably because I tried doing that a little too quick. Um, We could say, okay, how about the tallest buildings in a couple of other places? Um, this is another one. Oh, it's actually separating these out. So it's going to make a separate call for the tallest building in Spain, a separate call for the tallest building in Japan. Um, and then it's going to give that information. Still talking to me in French, but that's okay. Uh, since it's got the data that it needs, I'm just going to stop it there. But then you could even do something like, specifically asking it to do something that's going to happen in the Wolfram language. And what it should do here is then, yeah, and we can sit here and watch it write some code. It's going to take the previous information. It's going to try to generate a bar chart from that, and then hopefully it will get its syntax right, and something will come back here that we can take a look at. Mm, nope, it's doing something weird. So it's going to rewrite some code. I'm just going to go back to, I did this before and it did a similar thing. It had some goofiness with how it was writing the code, revised the code, sent it, and got something that still could use a little help with plot labels, but able to mine some data from Wolfram Alpha, take that data over to the Wolfram language. So it's just been really interesting to see ways that people can combine things from both of these sources. This is interesting. I mean, I'll make this point that the we'll be able to integrate plugins we're developing with Wolfram plugins right now. And again, this is an OpenAI thing. This is under their control. But right now, you can have up to 3 plugins activated in a given chat session. So certainly, other people who are developing their own plugins, we've done some interesting experiments on our side, like have the Expedia plugin and our plugin pulled up and ask questions that require doing some computation and finding flights to particular cities and doing some further computation with data that comes back from other plugins. So there's lots of interesting ways to think about combining the existing plugins and coming up with ideas for new things to develop. And a question about Bren Fraser. It's called go Wolfram because you're using plugin versus GPT-4. Right. I mean that certainly with GPT-4, I'm not going to say that it doesn't get facts right at all, because it definitely does. And that's not necessarily an example of something that, oh haha, we do better than the model at this. Just trying to point out that there's, all of that factual information is available. If you do have a plugin activated, then I think that generally the model that uses plugins is specifically designed to favor plugins over its own internal knowledge when it's in some area where that plugin is relevant. This one, good question. Looking at the training of arbitrary. This is a little tangled, but I will note that we have been we've provided some information, and certainly our hope in the future is that ChatGPT and certainly other LLMs are going to get better at writing Wolfram language code. We've actually got some. I'll switch over here. One of the things we've been focused on a lot recently, just in the company at large, is not just the APIs we've been developing for interfacing with LLMs, but other kinds of things. Making available training material from like you're pointing out, from demonstrations, from all of our documentation, other things, so that all these models can get better at doing Wolfram language code. I'm not sure. Anybody have any particular questions on our side? Deeper technically into how the plugin works. I mean, it's a good question. I mean, the how the plugins are actually set up is really pretty straightforward. I mean, there are a couple of files that need to be hosted on a website that include, an open API spec for the API that the model is going to call. and a prompt that gets invoked whenever the plugin is switched on. So that it's sort of, you turn on a plugin and there's some core prompting that tells the model, this is how you use this plugin. These are the kinds of questions you should send. This is what you should do with the response. And in our case, there's a lot of stuff that's sort of down into the details of, when you call out Wolfram Alpha, you want to do this. When you call Wolfram Language, you want to do this. If you don't get the results you want, this is a way to handle it. And so, but beyond that, it's mostly sort of, the model knows what to do, which is pretty impressive. Uh, Wolfram plugin. This question is not. It's not really how it works. Where the plugin isn't using anything in particular. Um, there is a specific plugin model, like I showed at the beginning. I can't say for sure what the relation is between this model and uh, GPT 3.5, GPT-4. I don't think it's GPT-4. I think it's more built on the kind of 3.5 models, but it is its own separate model, distinct from these, that has been specifically trained to handle this kind of interaction, to be open to having a lot of other plugins switched on in it. I don't know if either I think this question is more asking about an integration in the other way, like being able to uh, communicate with ChatGPT from a notebook. And there definitely are. I don't have links handy, but we have actually pushed out some things to the Wolfram Packlet repository recently that do exactly this. Some that we've created ourselves, some that other users have published to Wolfram community, um, that do add chat functionality using the Chat GPT, the turbo models on the back end, but having that interaction all happen in a Wolfram language notebook, which is very cool. So there are benefits to doing it through the Chat GPT website. Certainly a lot of other things that would only be available by starting in a notebook. I'm looking forward to the rest of the presentation this week and seeing what kinds of questions and ideas people come up with as we go.
Yeah, me too. Thank you so much, everyone, and we will see you tomorrow.